Welcome, everybody. This is live now. We have Sean on the line. Greets. How are you doing?
I'm okay. If you're hearing that oily, squeaky sound, that's the gates of hell opening to welcome George H.W. Bush, where his wife's waiting for him with her father, Alistair Crowley. Is it making you sick to see all the stuff about George H.W. Bush and him being lionized and canonized and what a great person he is and all that stuff on the TV? Are you getting it over there too?
We're not paying too much attention, but we don't pay too much attention to anything much here. We got our own basket of nutters to deal with. We have this thing they call Brexit, which is just a complete dog's breakfast. It's a mess.
Well, because the people wanted it, and now the elites don't want it, and they're trying to get the parliament to vote against it, even though it was the...
Nobody knows anything. Nobody knows what anybody wants. Nobody knows what anybody's going to do. Businessmen like the EU because it's easier to trade.
Right.
Patriots don't like it. People like the pound. It's a bit like California trying to secede. It's a different. It's like, you know what I mean.
It's a simian orgy and a tubular object, as they say.
That's it.
Okay, so let me do the pitch here. For everybody out there, let me give you an email. I want you to put this up on. It's a PayPal account. You're going to put this up on alternativerealitydisorder.com and everywhere that you can send it. I'm hoping to also send it to somebody like Anna Von Reitz, Carrie Cassidy, and Lorian Fenton, and everywhere that you can put it out there would be fantastic, including this. It's lifeisdarngoodYes at yahoo.com. That's the PayPal account for my legal eagles out there. LifeisdarngoodYes at yahoo.com. Now, that's the PayPal account just to keep my paralegal alive. Now, my doing the majority of this work, but that's just for if people could contribute anything that they could contribute at this moment. This is the final push for all of this. We had an appeal that I put together that was about 88 pages. I mean, the whole thing was massive because it had all the proof and all the evidence of all the crimes, of all the criminal activity of our friends at the Department of Injustice. It should be called the DOI instead of the DOJ. And all the things they did, actually taken at the lies they told out of their own mouths, the laws that show that they were violating the laws for what they did to us, et cetera, et cetera. So, with the help and advice of the Ninth Circuit Court, and their clerks and an attorney actually for the Ninth Circuit Court, who not only apparently, there was a clerk there, I think, who was a fan of mine from the radio, but had not only heard of the case, but had heard of the terrible and outrageous things that had been done to me in this, in essence gave us advice and said, look, pull out 6 motions out of this, which are the motions that could actually get this overturned, which had to do with vindictive prosecution and selective prosecution and being outside the jurisdiction and hold on, guys, I'm on the phone here. Move away. Thanks. And so the challenge of all this whole thing, you guys talking like right over me. So the challenge of this whole thing is, and this is why this is important. One of the things I'm going to get out there, and I'm desperate to send you to post up on the Alternative Reality Disorder blog, and to get it to people like Anna Von Reitz and whatever else. One of the biggest things that we're challenging, and this will help me, this will help people in here, this will help everybody across the United States, is, for example, people who have had their taxes done by H&R Block or by a CPA or by a licensed tax preparer cannot be held responsible for mistakes that are made by the tax preparer or the CPA, which is exactly what they did to us. They basically said, well, you're responsible for this, even though we left it to people that they used us as victims. That's another thing. Using victims against victims in certain crimes, and then turning around and then charging the victims is exactly like a woman being raped, and then the government turning around and saying, well, you wore that short dress, and we know what clear heels mean, and you were asking for it, so we're going to charge you as well as being the perpetrator of your own rape instead of being the victim of being raped. And so in the case of the taxes, we trusted 3 other people who did this for us, CPA and a taxpayer business. The other thing, the Jeffersonian definition, and I've said this once and I'll say it again, and it's something my family had dealt with in 74 when they were dead, because he was trying to just lay a trail of alternative natural cancer therapies into the United States. And he fought a 76-day trial that cost $2.6 million in San Diego County, basically treating him like he was a cocaine trafficker just because he was trying to bring in something to help people. And the Jeffersonian definition of tyranny is when one government agency can make law, can interpret law, and then can enforce law. Now, everybody thought that was absurd, that government couldn't do that. Marbury v. Madison, which was actually it was John Jay, who was actually the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
This call is from a federal prison.
And Marbury v. Madison, I think in 1806, that said that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and is the highest arbitrator of the land. Well, that was only up until they did a case which was called Chevron USA, Inc. versus Natural Resources Defense Council, Inc. And that's 467 U.S. 637, if anyone wants to look it up. But it was a landmark case in which the United States Supreme Court set forth the legal test for determining whether to grant deference to a government agency's interpretation of a statute that it basically administers and enforces. So if the Environmental Protection Agency comes on your land and they find a puddle, and they rule that puddle is a causeway, is a waterway of some kind, they can basically take your land or fine you $10,000 a day, which is them making, interpreting, and enforcing their own rules and laws. Now, we tried to bring up Marbury v. Madison during my case, and we had a judge who then turned around and said, well, I'm going to allow the IRS to basically interpret, enforce, and to make, interpret, enforce their own statute. So the Chevron case is basically the court's clearest evaluation of the doctrine of administrative deference. Now, usually they do that in civil cases, but in a criminal case, it has to then be left up to specifically the court to rule on what Congress is trying to say as far as the legislative branch goes. And in my case, the whole thing, but I mean, it's not in the Constitution at all, or saying that the Constitution is now trumped by a series of inferior rules. It's more like it allows agencies who are separate powers unto themselves to allow them the judicial aspect of this. Now, I have a legitimate challenge to the Chevron case. I have a claim where we've been damaged. Now we're going to lay out on the blog, because I can't say it all here, but we'll lay out on the blog point by point how this is going to help everybody in the United States, not just us, not just getting me free. I mean, just the two motions of selective prosecution, because there were 549 other people that had their taxes done by these people, and guess who was prosecuted? They prosecuted the people that were doing it, and then myself and Melissa. Then they turned around and tried to say that we were the architects of this when we just went to a class and allowed this guy to do the taxes for us. I was making most of my living through a religious educational 501c3 through contributions specifically that allowed me to teach spiritual information and whatever else. But when I started doing foreign exchange and I turned $525,000 into what the SEC claims is $11.6 million using remote viewing, and then turning around and saying I was somehow guilty of a crime because I was using psychic powers to predict the currency markets, and that apparently being psychic is impossible. Therefore, I was somehow civilly guilty of fraud. And I'm like, how can this be fraudulent when you're claiming that I made all this money for all these people, and then I had a trader that didn't want to do what I told him to do, then lose the money? How is that fraudulent? So the crazy part about this whole thing is that then to claim that I'm somehow the architect of this, and I'm somehow, literally, I'm being put in prison as a deterrent and as an example to anyone who would question the voluntary income tax system of the United States, which I never did. Because it says right at the top, 1040, voluntary income tax form. Not only did I not question it, I told everybody, absolutely, you want to volunteer? You want to pay your taxes? Then you should volunteer and pay your taxes. And I was filling out their forms at a time when what we were doing wasn't illegal. We filled out their forms to submit to get the return that we got. Everything we did was legal at the time. And it was beyond the statute of...
This call is from a federal prison.
And when they asked us to then resubmit the forms to clarify, we resubmitted the forms, and they turned around and said, oh, well, that's now within our statute of limitations. He refiled this stuff because we asked him to. So, and again, the judge allowed them. They were 4 months past the statute of limitations for any of this stuff, and the judge was like, "Oh, I'll allow it. Sure thing. Why not?" And the other thing is too is that all of my motions, now these are called emergency expedited dispository motions, which can overturn this entire case. Now they're due a response to what I put in on November 21st. They have until about December 5th or so to respond to this, and it's going to be funny because we use their own words against them. We use the law that they were using against them, showing that it didn't apply to us at all. But we need help. I just need my legal people to have enough money for mailing, to have enough money for them to basically eat and pay their rent for the next month or so. Because here's what we have laid out. We've got the 6 dispository motions, emergency motions, which means that the Ninth Circuit Court, with your help, once again, life is darn good, yes, at yahoo.com. Anybody that wants to contribute to that PayPal site, like I said, it's $50, $100, just a few bucks so that my kids can eat. And it's mostly for mailing because we had to scrape the bottom of the barrel and actually borrow money just to do the mailing the last time. But if the dispository motions don't work, then right after that we've got a habeas corpus, and not the 2255, but the real habeas corpus, a constitutional habeas corpus, which can then go directly on a fast track to the Supreme Court. And if that doesn't work, then we've got an 88-page appellate brief that's ready to go. But again, the Ninth Circuit Court said, why go through an appellate brief where everything has to be checked, and you've got to check about 3,000 pages of documents, when you can just pull out the stuff that's the most heinous, the most horrible crimes that they committed against you, and pull that out and put those in as motions. So the great thing so far has been I've been batting 1,000 with the Ninth Circuit Court. The only reason I've been here so long is because I've refused to take a lawyer. I refused to take a lawyer. 5 times they tried to force one on me. 5 times I said no. Then you had an appellate commissioner say, well, you have to have one because of this. I said no again and rebutted it, and the appellate commissioner said, okay, well, let me have a conversation with you. And a hearing that was supposed to last like 5 hours lasted, I think, 38 minutes with all the swearing in, where the appellate commissioner reversed himself and said, well, Dr. Borton, you know what you're talking about. You're obviously, you're erudite. You can write. You've written a number of best-selling books. Once again, you can still get Sands of Time, books 1, 2, and 3, The Isomer Protocol. I think they're still up at StrangeUniverseRadio.com. I think that Anna is still fulfilling orders. Once again, they got 5 stars on Amazon. But this whole plan of attack being laid out is ready to go. But we just need people's help as far as reading and educating themselves. I mean, it's when there's criminal charges, there's supposed to be a judge which is supposed to referee, and there's 2 different branches that are depending on if civil or criminal. Chevron puts it in the agency's legislative branch what would be criminal and what would be in the judicial branch. It's up to the judicial branch to then interpret the law, not to allow the IRS or some other government agency to do that. So, if that makes sense, there are no stupid questions here. I mean, it's brilliant. Plus, this case is absolutely perfect. Wilson, the judge in our case, argued with Melissa's attorney, Brody, that IRS had the final determination of the penalties and under criminal law. So we have a real challenge to Chevron due to that false theory of the IRS being the final interpreter of criminal law on the record. But it's so, even Brody, the attorney in the case, was like, he disagreed, so there was an argument between Melissa's attorney and myself and the judge as to whether or not they could interpret it. And also, you have the IRS trying to enforce things that have to do with bonds, which is the ballywick of the Secret Service. They refuse to tell us whether or not they were an agency or a department or some branch of the federal government, because they're a private service that basically comes under Title 16 rather than Title 26. So there's all this stuff where we can literally once and for all clip the wings of the federal government, of the Internal Revenue Service, and eventually expose these criminals at the Department of Justice for who and what they are and how they selectively targeted and prosecuted people who are famous and people who are up there fighting for freedom. But we need your help. Life is darn good, yes, at yahoo.com. Life is darn good, yes. It's a PayPal account. Anything you can contribute right now, we're at the final push for this, and hopefully with God's help and with your love, I'll be out of here by Christmas, maybe Valentine's.
Well, that's all we get from Sean tonight, and we'll be continuing with Sands of Time if there's going to be a break. Thank you, Mike, for holding the breaks back.